Hello, NBCC nursing students. So glad that you could join us today. My name is Melanie Langell and I work with the New Brunswick Lung Association. And my colleague, Liz Smith, and I had reached out to your instructor earlier in the semester talking about potentially coming to visit you and sharing some of our programming with you. And we're delighted that we're able to join you virtually in this new reality that we all find ourselves in. I am coming to you from a corner in my basement where I've set up a little home office for the time being. So it's strange times for everybody, but it's still a great time to learn. And we're delighted to bring to you this program, what we call Healthy Habits for Healthy Homes. Chemicals are all around us. Now, many chemicals are helpful, like medicines that are synthetic chemicals can be very helpful to society, but many more are toxic. So toxic meaning causing death or cancer or endocrine disruption effects. And they can be found outdoors and indoors, in food and cosmetics and dust. They're everywhere. But we can take steps to protect ourselves from toxins in the home, and you as future nurses can help your future patients to minimize their exposures to toxins and help identify the sources of some of their illnesses by understanding what they're exposed to at home. And most of the things that we're going to talk about also happen to save you money. Everybody's at risk from exposure to chemicals. Even more so if you're a child, youth, pregnant, baby in utero, if you're senior or already ill, or if you're experiencing some health inequities like many of our First Nations and Inuit and other remote communities are, the risk of chemicals is higher. The chemicals that we're going to talk about today are not something that you can see, smell, taste, but they can get into the body through breathing, eating and drinking, absorption through the skin, and exposure to the baby through the placenta from the mother. Here's some examples of some of the routes of exposures and some of the chemicals that we're going to talk about today. These chemicals are in children's toys, in plastic drinking bottles, in cleaning products, house dust, home furniture and electronics, building materials, fragrances, food packaging, thermal cash register receipts, those shiny ones that you get from the grocery store. Most every store these days are just full of BPA, which is a hormone disrupting chemical. Drinking water is a source of exposure for many people, especially if you have well water, and personal care products. This graphic shows a number of systems in the body that are controlled by hormones and so can be disrupted with these hormone disrupting chemicals. So we see in children lower IQ, hyperactivity, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorders being linked back to exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals, asthma, obesity in all life stages, early puberty in children, infertility in women and men, developmental dysfunction and low birth weight in babies, diabetes, obesity, thyroid disorders in adults, and other sex organ cancers that are all regulated by endocrine chemicals. This little graphic shows a bit of an example about how we can minimize our risk of something by reducing the hazard or reducing the exposure. So we know that standing out in the sun during the peak of the day is very dangerous, very risky. We can reduce that risk by either not exposing ourselves to the hazard or reducing our exposure. So we're going to talk about that in the context of toxins that are found in the home, and that most everybody that you're going to speak to as potential patients could potentially be exposed to. So in the air, in the dust and mold in our homes, plastics, foods, and personal care products. And we're going to go through each of these categories. Some of the main sources of poor air quality in the home is any kind of smoke, whether it's cigarettes, cannabis, vape, or smoke from a wood or oil burning fireplace or furnaces. Any fragrances that are added into the air is chock full of chemicals. Fragrances can be in scented cosmetics or cleaners or air fresheners. Radon gas and carbon monoxide are also important to understand in the context of indoor air quality. And we're going to go through these next. It's pretty easy to minimize your exposure to smoke. If anybody in the home smokes, always the best option to reduce your exposure to smoke is to not smoke. But if that's not possible for one reason or another, any smoking should be done outside the home, away from doors and windows, so that people inside are not exposed. And definitely quitting smoking. The money saving factor can be pretty motivating for some people. It's important to maintain your fireplaces for safety and also for efficiency. So it's important, if you have a wood burning fireplace, to have it cleaned and inspected annually. Any smoke that's going out your chimney or potentially into your home, if it's not ventilated properly, it's actually wasted money. It's incomplete combustion of your fuel source. So if you, by learning how to, what we call, burn it hot, you can learn different ways to maximize the amount of heat that you get out of the wood or other fuel that you've bought, and have the biggest bang for your buck heat-wise. And we like to recommend, if anybody is able to financially, to consider upgrading to a more efficient model of wood burning fireplaces, or if it's time to replace any sort of furnace or any sort of heating appliance, to go with the most efficient that you can. Radon gas. You may have heard about radon gas. We talk about it a lot at the Lung Association, and Health Canada has recently put a bit of a media blitz out about it. So radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas. And actually in New Brunswick, we have very high levels of radon throughout our province. This gas can get into buildings through small cracks in the foundation. Those cracks can be around like where pipes come through the floor or the wall, so it's not necessarily just a poor condition foundation with lots of cracks in it. It can come through any building. So every building has radon. It's just a matter of how much is there. Radon exposure is kind of sneaky. You don't have any immediate symptoms, no matter what the level of radon is in the house. You're not going to notice it immediately. It could be years and years and years before you develop lung cancer. And radon is the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers in Canada, so it's second only to smoking. But it's really easy to test your home to figure out what sorts of levels of radon are there. At the Lung Association, we sell test kits for $35 that they're very easy to set up in your home and send off to the lab and get your results. And once you know whether or not you have acceptable or risky levels of radon in your home, you can know whether you need to take some small steps to ventilate that radon. So instead of going into your home, it goes out into the outdoor air where it disperses and it's not a risk anymore. Carbon monoxide in the home is another sneaky, odorless gas that can be deadly. At low levels, mild carbon monoxide poisoning has symptoms like headache and fatigue, shortness of breath, weakness, and at high concentrations it can be deadly. Unfortunately, a number of people die in Canada every year from carbon monoxide poisoning. So let's talk about ways to reduce and prevent that. Carbon monoxide is the result, is one of the byproducts of burning any carbon-based fuels. So wood, oil, these are all carbon-based things, anything that you burn, really. So similar to what we talked about on the smoke side of things, it's really important to keep everything in good repair and ventilated as best as possible. If you're having a fire in your fireplace and it's kind of smoky, well, that's not a good thing. It's not just the smoke, there's carbon monoxide too. So keep those things as ventilated as you can and keep them in good repair. A really good idea, if you have any sort of appliance that burns fuels, even natural gas fueled fireplaces or stoves and ranges or dryers. These are all things that have a potential source of carbon monoxide. So you can buy a carbon monoxide detector that's very similar to a smoke detector that has an audible alarm on it if there are unsafe levels of carbon monoxide in the house. Really important if you're burning anything. And although this might seem obvious, it's very important to reiterate, and many people die in Canada every year from situations where maybe you're panicked and you're not in your normal mindset, so we like to reiterate it. So if you have, say, an extended power outage and you're unable to cook in your kitchen as usual, you might think, well, I'll cook on the barbecue, but it's cold outside, I'm going to bring the barbecue inside. Well, bringing the barbecue inside is bringing potentially lethal amounts of carbon monoxide with it. So we like to reiterate to never use gas grills or barbecues or heaters in the house. Another situation where people might think they have bigger fish to fry and more pressing concerns is if your house got flooded and you're trying to quickly dry it out and you've got some gas-powered space heaters. Always important to use those in well-ventilated areas or not at all to avoid carbon monoxide poisoning. Similarly, if you have a garage, starting the car or a generator or a snow blower with the door closed is not a good idea. Keep the garage door open, keep the door to the house closed, try to keep those sources of fumes out of the house. But if you have a patient that comes to you and is talking about recurring headaches and fatigue and shortness of breath and weaknesses, these are questions you can ask about what their home situation is like and try to pinpoint where that exposure is coming from. Scented products contribute a lot to indoor air pollution. So scents in products can be hundreds of synthetic chemicals that can be very hazardous. So as much as possible, we like to recommend that people choose unscented personal products and laundry detergents and cleaning products. And thankfully, these are easier and easier to find. I personally have some sensitivities to scents, and several years ago, I had a hard time finding things that would fit the bill that I could buy right off the shelf that would be unscented and wouldn't give me headaches. So air fresheners, incense, scented candles, these are all things that add pollutants into the air. And so better just to avoid those. If you're using them to try to cover up an unpleasant smell, more important to figure out what that unpleasant smell is and correct it than to cover it up with some chemicals that you're adding to indoor air pollution. When we speak about having bad odors in the house, let's talk about household cleaning. Start with dust. What is dust? It's a little bit of everything. It's dead skin, it's hairs, it's bits of soil that might come in as you go in and out of the house. There could be fungal spores. Not included on the slide is pollen. There could be pollen. Sometimes in the spring you go to dust and it's completely yellow. That's pollen. There can be chemical residues and generally just the deterioration and breakdown of stuff. All your stuff in your home is going to break down over time. And what's in your stuff? So your stuff may be coated with flame retardants. It may have some phthalates. There may be pesticides in things that come into your house. Maybe it comes in off your shoes because you just were spraying your lawn to get rid of the dandelions. Maybe you're bringing in on your shoes lead, mercury, and arsenic that can be found in all sorts of sources in the soil outdoors. Super simple way to minimize dust and the contaminants that can get into your house is to keep outdoor footwear outdoors. If you're the type of person who likes to wear shoes inside, well, just have a separate pair that you wear at home. And dusting regularly is always a good idea to minimize the dust. And all you need is a damp cloth. You don't need any expensive sprays or wipes. And another thing that you can tell your patients down the road, particularly if you're doing home visits and people are struggling with balancing their budget and trying to keep a healthy home for their kids, you don't need to buy those sprays. A wet cloth is all you need. Vacuuming, obviously a great way to reduce dust, and wet mopping is all you need. Again, no fancy spray-on products or chemical cleaners. That you don't even need it to minimize dust. If there are small children in the house, like we said, they are more sensitive to chemical exposures. Also, they get into stuff more than the average person. So my toddler will always find the dust bunnies that I thought I had eliminated from behind the couch, but somehow she gets in there, and the next thing I know, so always be mindful of what the kids are getting into, and it's more than you might think. So one of the best ways to minimize dust is just to reduce clutter in general. That's going to minimize the amounts of surfaces that you have to dust when you are dusting, and make it go faster, and it's less of a chore. So you can either get rid of lots of possessions if you go into a home and you notice people are having breathing issues, but they have shelves and shelves and shelves of knickknacks that have layers and layers of dust on them. Suggest that maybe they keep their knickknacks, or maybe just their favorites, in a closed cabinet, or maybe they move some of those items into closed bins so that they're not getting covered in dust week after week. And dusting under furniture and under electronics is really important. Furniture and electronics often contain some flame retardants, which are very hazardous to our health, so we want to make sure that that dust is not moving around. I know a lot of us are stuck at home right now with the COVID-19 crisis. Maybe this is the time that you're going to do some extra spring cleaning, some extra deep cleaning. Take the time to move that bookcase that maybe you haven't vacuumed behind in a couple of years, and just really take this opportunity to bust that dust. Mold inside your home is a little bit more obvious than some of the chemicals that we've talked about. And some of the symptoms that you might see in yourself or in others are eye, nose, and throat irritation, coughing, phlegm buildup, wheezing, and shortness of breath, symptoms of asthma and allergic reactions and eczema. These can all be linked back to mold. I had a niece who, her mother thought for about a year that, man, my daughter keeps getting a cold. It seems like every week she's got a new cold. She must be getting all these germs from daycare. So it turned out they had a mold problem in their bathroom, and my niece was allergic to the mold, and so she was having all these issues, and they weren't able to treat it with anything that you'd use for a common cold. Not that there's much more than just managing symptoms, but nevertheless, it was only after the fact that they realized that the mold was the source of her illness. And once they moved out of that apartment, then she was much better and didn't get a cold every couple of weeks. So mold is pretty obvious. You can see it, you can smell it, that musty smell. And some people are very, very, very sensitive to it. Here's a picture of some yucky mold growth, and you're going to find it in basements, bathrooms, under sinks, windowsills, carpets and fabrics and laundry areas, anywhere where there's lots of moisture. That's what it needs. Lots of moisture that hasn't been ventilated properly. Pretty easy to recognize. It's sometimes it's black, and sometimes it's white and fuzzy, and sometimes it's all different colors, but it's pretty obvious, and it's not something you can overlook. Usually a musty smell to it. It might be wet or damp. I've seen ceiling tiles that are squishy when you poke them because they've had a lot of mold growth and a lot of moisture. Something else to look out for is condensation on windows. So that consistent amount of moisture there is just a breeding ground for mold. If you've got just a little bit of mold, that can be cleaned up pretty safely with dish detergent and water. When we say small area, I mean like a meter by a meter or less, or 3 feet by 3 feet or less. If it's something larger than that, that might require a professional, because we're getting into lots of area, and it's probably based on something large, like some sort of moisture problem. Maybe it's a leaking roof. And if you don't fix that leaking roof and correct that moisture problem, the mold's just going to keep returning. So rather than just trying to clean it up yourself, better to correct the cause and then clean it up once and for all, and it shouldn't be a problem anymore. Good things you can do to prevent mold is to always use a dehumidifier in damp areas like laundry rooms or basements. Um, if you get that musty smell in a basement, you should invest in a dehumidifier. Using a bathroom fan every time you shower, turning the exhaust fan on when you cook and you're boiling water for your pasta, all that water, all that moisture is just going to stay in your kitchen if you're not able to ventilate it outside. Similarly, if you're doing some extra spring cleaning, crack a window if you can. If it's starting to get warm enough that we can crack a window most days, yay. And just try to keep the moisture level down in the house, and that's going to go a long ways towards controlling mold growth. Now, more and more these days, we're hearing about pesticides and chemical additives and added artificial flavors and colors in foods. So it's getting really hard to know what we're putting in our bodies. And it's important to recognize that just because a food item is on the grocery store shelf doesn't mean it's good for you. Doesn't mean that you should eat it. But that is a fact that can be overlooked. So a couple of different ways to know what you're putting in your body is choosing foods that are made with simple and wholesome ingredients. And as nurses, you know the value of putting good nutrition into your body because you need to fuel your body with real stuff. So unnatural and modified and artificial additives is not something that our body knows how to use. And we know the dangers of added sugars and hydrogenated and trans fats. The image here is an ingredient list from a blueberry muffin on the bottom. I'm not sure what the top one is. But a lot of these ingredients are not something that I would put in muffins if I was baking them in my kitchen. You know, so propylene, glycol ester, what are some of these other ones? Silicon dioxide. These are not things that are things that your body can use for fuel. And look, in this blueberry muffin, ingredients are listed from most prominent to the least amount in the food. Very last ingredient, so the very least by weight in this food is blueberries. That's kind of funny, I just noticed that now. There are lots of ways that people can take steps to have a healthier plate of food. And these are things that you can encourage in your nursing practice and encourage people to take their health into their own hands and into their own mouths. And in lots of ways, save them money. Lots of people that you're going to be dealing with are going to have a hard time balancing their budgets. And maybe food is the one place where they find that they can cut back and go the cheaper route. But you really get out what you put in, especially when it comes to your bodies. So some of the tips that we like to encourage people to do, take on one tip or do as many as you can fit into your budget, whatever works for your family and your food preferences. But the best options are buying locally and sustainably as much as you can, buying fresh and local in season veggies and fruits, or frozen in the winter time. Obviously, we don't have access in Canada to lots of fresh fruits and vegetables in the winter, but frozen are just as nutritious. We do like to say to avoid canned veggies and fruits because cans often have BPA in the lining of the can to make it so that the product doesn't leak out and the can doesn't get holes in it. And BPA is a hormone disrupting chemical. Now I want to draw your attention to, I have this can of soup here as a little prop, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but it says non-BPA lining. I have no idea if it has BPS or BPF or other BPs, other bisphenols, which are just as bad and just as hormonally active in the body, if not more. So there's some studies to show that BPF and S are actually more potent than BPA. So it's important to be a savvy consumer, and that's getting harder and harder to do. So by just avoiding canned fruits and veggies, you can avoid that altogether. Rinsing fresh produce is really important to remove any pesticide residues or dirts or bacteria that could have been in the water that was used for the irrigation. And when you're choosing fish, choose things that are lower on the food chain, because mercury is something that's common in water, in our oceans and in our lakes. It's a pollutant that's gotten there, and it is very persistent. It stays for a long time, gets in the body of aquatic organisms, and it's not used by their body. So it just gets sort of incorporated into those tissues, and then the next level up predator eats that and it gets into their tissues, and so on and so forth. So by the time you get to something like a high-end predator, like a shark that has eaten hundreds to thousands of small fish over its lifetime, or tuna, which is a giant fish, I think they're about 10 feet long. They eat a lot of little fish. And so the mercury can build up in their bodies, and that can be particularly hazardous for young children and pregnant women, or women who may become pregnant, because that mercury gets in our body and has nowhere to go, but it will go through the placenta into the baby. Here's a few easy steps for healthier plates of food. Avoiding nonstick cookware. I've got a picture on the next slide of nonstick cookware, but the coating that's used on that is perfluoroalkylated substances, or you might hear them referred to as PFAS, which are a hormone disrupting chemical. But they're pretty popular because it's nice to have nonstick cookware. Absolutely, it makes life easier, but maybe not in the long run. People that have well water really should be testing it at least once a year for bacteria. That can cause some gastrointestinal issues, and it can fluctuate year to year or even month to month, but every 6 months to a year is a good frequency to test well water. It's relatively inexpensive. Other chemicals can be in water, other naturally occurring minerals like arsenic, and there are some other ones too. Manganese is another one. Lead can be common in some parts of our country and naturally occurring, and so those can be some of the underlying causes of some of the symptoms that you may see in your medical practice. And lots of people do not test their well water at all and have no idea what they're drinking for years and years and years. Using a thermometer when cooking meats, this can be really easy. An instant read thermometer will only set you back about $15 or $20, and then you know for sure that you have destroyed any potentially harmful bacteria that could be on the meats. Similarly, on the bacteria side, it's important to store leftovers as soon as possible in the fridge, as soon as, so not letting them cool down to a dangerously low temperature. The danger zone, we call it, around 4 degrees, or between 4 degrees and room temperature, is the ideal temperature for reproduction of bacteria. So here's a picture of an old Teflon pan. So the Teflon is going to break down a little bit over time, but that breakdown is going to be accelerated if it's scratched or chipped. So definitely do not recommend buying a Teflon or any other name brand. Teflon is the name brand, but it's all PFAS coated, these non-stick pots and pans. Don't buy them secondhand, especially don't buy them secondhand, but wouldn't recommend buying them new either if you're replacing your pans. Let's talk a little bit about plastics. Lots of talk about plastics out there these days. It can make your head spin. There are so many issues with plastics. On the environmental side of things, plastics are actually made from oil products. So any negative environmental things you hear about the extraction of oil, you can extrapolate that to plastics. Lots of single-use plastics that has gotten a lot of media attention, polluting the oceans, polluting everywhere, building up like crazy. And only some types of plastics actually get recycled at the end of the day. Most of the time they're going to landfill if they're getting disposed of properly, if they're not just being tossed into the ocean, or Tim's cup being tossed out of a car while it's going down the road. To put all that aside, when it comes to toxic exposures in using plastics, when it comes to food in your home or in your workplace, it's important to know that there are harmful chemicals within the plastic. So these are things like phthalates, flame retardants, bisphenols, and styrenes, which are, again, hormone disrupting chemicals. These harmful chemicals can leach into food when they're heated. So this is something that as an environmental scientist I was aware of, but it was sort of in the back of my mind and it was easy to put off until I came to work for the Lung Association about 6 months ago. And the more I started researching this issue of plastics and food, the more I realized heat, plastic, and food should not mix. It's okay to use your plastic containers that you have for cold food storage. There's no chemicals are going to leach out of the plastic and into your sandwich or into your dried beans or anything like that that you might have in your pantry. So don't think that you need to go home and throw all your containers away or recycle them, ideally. There are other uses for them until they get to the end of their life, and then you can recycle them. But the best option health-wise is to store any food leftovers in glass or ceramic. If you've got any sort of hot food that needs to be stored and the only containers you have are plastic, let that hot food cool first. So if you made a big pot of soup and you want to store your leftovers in the plastic containers that you have, let it cool down until it's at a safe temperature to put into your plastic containers. Another hidden danger in plastics is that not all types of plastics are food grade or safe to use with food. And this is something, again, that I wasn't really aware of. It was really eye-opening when I came to Lung Association recently. So on your plastic containers, you probably can't see this because it's actually so tiny. No. But on this Tupperware container, there's a number of symbols on the bottom, but there is the recycling symbol, and it's recycling symbol number 5. And I thought that was just so that when this came to its end of its life, I would know which bin to toss it in or whether or not my municipality could accept that type of plastic. But actually, that's an indication that this is a food grade plastic and that's safe for my food. I'm not going to put my hot foods in this. So just like food storage, we can also see those recycling symbols on toys. And so the symbols 1, 2, and 5 are generally considered safe. Again, when you add heat into the mix, that becomes null and void. But 1, 3, and 5 are generally food safe for cold items, but we want to avoid 3, 6, and 7. And unfortunately, there are products on the market that are children's toys, or they are food containers that are these recycling symbols 3, 6, or 7, and they shouldn't be out there, but they are. So it's important to know these things when you're shopping. A couple of ways you can avoid this, especially on the toy side of things, is checking for labels that that say that this product doesn't have PVC in it. There's no phthalates, there's no BPA. Avoid toys that are made from vinyl and PVC because these also have chemicals in them. And something to do if you are a parent or if you buy toys for children in your life, Health Canada does have a good recall system that if sometimes some products get out into the market that shouldn't, and once they're out there, they can be recalled, and you can sign up for alerts to get notifications of different recalls. Maintaining a plastic-free life is pretty difficult these days. It's everywhere, but there's a couple of key areas that you can reduce your plastic use that are going to have the most positive effect on your health. So on the food storage sides of things, stainless steel, glass, ceramic, or beeswax wraps are really good options. Beeswax wraps are becoming more and more popular. You can use them in place of what you would use saran wrap for. You can actually make these yourself if you're crafty. There's lots of recipes out there on Pinterest for making your own beeswax wraps. It might take a little trial and error. I haven't been successful yet with my trials, but I'm going to try again. On the shopping side of things, reusable bags have become almost the social norm, which is great. And that's a change that I've seen in my lifetime. 10 years ago, you were the odd one out if you were the one bringing reusable shopping bags, and now it seems to be switched. So lots of stores are starting to charge you for plastic bags, and that's great. It's a great way to keep them out of our landfills. There are also starting to be more and more options on the market for mesh produce bags, so you won't be using those plastic bags to put your lemons in when you go through the produce section, and that's awesome. Some stores actually offer what they call naked produce, which is produce that isn't in any sort of plastic packaging. Sometimes you can, depending on the store that you're shopping in, there might be green peppers that are naked and green peppers that also come in wrappings. And so as a consumer, you can choose to go with the one that doesn't have the plastic wrapping. When you're getting takeout, there's lots of options too for alternatives to plastic. If you're going to a restaurant and you know that they have really big servings and you're probably not going to be able to finish your meal and you're going to bring it home for lunch tomorrow, bring your own container with you. Be great if you had a glass container or a ceramic container you could toss in your bag on your way out to the restaurant. And then instead of using the styrofoam container that the restaurant would provide you with, you've got your own container, and it doesn't matter to them where you put your leftovers. You can put it in your own container and then take it home for another day. If you're going to a place that has single-use plastic utensils, you can always bring your own. It's pretty easy to toss a fork and a spoon in your backpack as you're going to school, and then you've got those with you all the time instead of relying on the single use that might be available in the school cafeteria. Straws is another option. You don't need a straw, so you can opt to not have one, or you can bring your own. Lots of people are opting for these stainless steel straws, and that's kind of a cool option too if you're a big straw person. And bringing your own mug and bottle is always an option. Bringing your own water bottle somewhere so you don't have to buy single-use plastics for your water, or coffee mug is also great. Lots of coffee shops will actually give you a little discount if you are getting a refill in a travel mug as opposed to using one of their disposable mugs. Let's shift gears now from what we put on the inside of our body in the food realm to what we're putting on the outside of our body in personal care products. As nursing students, you're probably aware that skin is an organ, but this is a fact that the layperson really does not, in my experience anyways, most people don't understand that the skin is actually an organ. I don't know what they think it is, maybe just a shell or something, and that whatever we put on the outside of our body actually gets into our body. So as you apply products to your skin, whether it's shower gel or it's perfumes or lotions or there's a plethora of things that we as society like to put on our skin. So the chemicals inside those products can get into the body, and depending on what they are, they might build up in the body over time the more you use them. And unfortunately, and kind of terrifyingly, lots of ingredients in cosmetics are known carcinogens, pesticides, reproductive toxins, hormone disrupting chemicals. If you'd like to watch a really good documentary on CBC, you can stream it for free. It's a documentary called Toxic Beauty, and it is a real eye-opener, and lots of good, credible information in there coming from good sources. But they put it together in a really good and really understandable way for the layperson. So if you've got some extra time on your hands, absolutely stream Toxic Beauty on CBC. So here are some pretty simple tips on how to reduce exposure to chemicals in cosmetic products and other personal care products. And another money saver is just don't buy these products, or maybe use them less often, or use less. Maybe you're a person who is a very heavy makeup wearer, but maybe you want to cut back on that a little bit and just use more of a lighter touch on most days, and then really go for the wow factor if you're having a big special event, and go all out on the makeup. Absolutely. Every now and then it's probably not going to hurt. In Canada, we're lucky that in 2015 there was legislation passed that all cosmetic products have to have an ingredients label on them. That's not the case in other countries. So if you buy things in other countries, or maybe you buy things online that are coming from other countries, just be aware of that you may not be able to do your research, and you might not know what is in that product that you are applying to your skin day in and day out. So it's important to, as much as you can, go with natural ingredients, and really do your research. There's so many products out there and the chemical names get really complicated, but I'm going to give you some resources in the next slide or two on how to do your research on these products. And if you're dealing with a potential patient down the road who is a heavy cosmetic wearer, these are things that you can weave into your conversations, that maybe they could rethink some of these habits for their own health. And these are things that the more changes we do now in the younger years, the more effects you're going to have in later in life. So here's some great resources. Well, the first one is the Healthy Habits for Healthy Homes website that we have put together. We've collated a bunch of information for you from reputable and trustworthy sources that are all fact-based. There's a lot of junk on the internet. You may have determined this already. So it can be hard. So just a nod of the head to the David Suzuki Foundation, and the Queen of Green section on his website gives lots of information on making your own cleaners. There's even a great section that they put out right now in response to the COVID-19 virus on disinfecting. So lots of people who make their own disinfectants use vinegar most of the time. That is usually okay for most things that we encounter, but vinegar is not a strong enough disinfectant for this virus, okay? So the recommendations on Queen of Green right now is in line with Health Canada's recommendations, and you can, the natural alternative that you can use that is sufficient to disinfect this virus is a hydrogen peroxide base. So you can check that out yourself if you're doing some extra spring cleaning, or if you are following the advice of the top public health authorities and disinfecting high-touch surfaces on a regular basis. Check out the Queen of Green for something you can make yourself that won't pollute your indoor air. So we also reference a lot Less Toxic Guide, and also lots of resources on Health Canada's website. And we put those all together in a brochure that you're going to see later on when Liz speaks to you. And I believe it will be provided by your instructor too. So to wrap up, I want to reiterate that small steps can make a big difference. So whether it's in your own lives, in the lives of your family and friends, or as you go out into the world and are a trusted resource for people who are looking for good health information, people trust nurses. So the more that you guys can understand the environmental effects, environmental exposures that can cause health effects and how those link together, the better able you're going to be to educate your patients down the road. So again, environmental exposures in the home generally come in the form of air, dust and mold, plastics, foods, and personal care products. Some simple things that we can do is keeping smoke and vape outside, avoiding scented products, testing your home for radon and carbon monoxide, dusting and vacuuming regularly and minimizing clutter, preventing mold growth, DIY or natural cleaners, avoid lots of chemicals in the home. On the food side of things, using ceramic, glass, stainless steel, or beeswax wraps for food storage is much better for your health than plastics. And always avoid plastics with hot food. Cooking at home is a great alternative, saves you money, you know what you're putting in your body, you're going to have better health because you're eating more wholesome ingredients that will better fuel your body. And choosing fresh or frozen instead of canned fruits and vegetables as much as possible is going to help you avoid some of those BP chemicals, the bisphenols. On the personal products side of things, reducing the use of cosmetics is definitely the best way to go, and becoming a savvy consumer and doing your research on which products you're using on your body, understanding it. The more natural you can go, the better, and the least impact they're going to have on your health. And with that, I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Liz. She's going to talk to you a little bit more about how to lead a healthier life and talk to you about your homework assignment.
Hi, my name is Liz Smith, and I've worked for the Lung Association for 20 years this spring. And right now, my contract is to enable or engage Canadians in Canada's Chemicals Management Plan, which deals with all the chemicals that have been put into use that we need to decide how we're going to manage them. Because some of them are toxic, some of them are more toxic than others, as you know. So I just want to show you the difference. I'll tell you some different things that can help you build resilience. Melanie's shown you lots of tips to reduce your toxic exposure, and I want to show you some things about how it makes a difference to your life and your health. And of all times, this is a good time to know how to build your resilience in the face of a communicable disease, but it can also help you reduce your possibilities of getting, say, cancer and other things like diabetes. So let me just show you an example of what the National Cancer Institute in the US says. We'll start our slides. So here's a slide that from the American Association for Cancer Research, and it's actually from 2019, so it's very recent, and it shows the differences that lifestyle can make on your chance to the likelihood of you getting cancer. So as you know, tobacco here on the left is one of the major things that you can affect. If you quit smoking, that can reduce your chances of getting several different kinds of cancer. Excess body weight, if you're overweight, then we can do something about that. Alcohol, overconsumption of alcohol beyond a very, very moderate amount can make a huge difference, especially depending on your genetics. Some people are more prone to skin cancers, like fair-skinned people are more prone to skin cancers than dark-skinned people. And that's another thing that cannot help. If you have a poor diet, diet's hugely important. And Melanie actually pointed out several ways that you should eat better. And Health Canada certainly has a very good food guide now. Infections can also cause cancer, like HPV is caused by an infection. HPV is an infection that causes cervical cancer and oral cancers. And physical inactivity is also a big one. Apparently, if you're physically more inactive, you don't have the chance of you developing or producing a protein that can ward off cancers is increased. If you're more active, this protein is more present in your body. So what you do makes a difference, and your exposure to toxins is the same way. This is the same thing. Actually, I was listening to something on CBC the other day, and it was very recent. And the U.S. National Cancer Institute said that different cancers could be reduced by 20% on average by moderate exercise every day. And this included breast, ovarian, urinary, prostate, bladder, esophageal, colon cancer. So it also makes a difference to depression and diabetes. So this is something for you to consider. As you know, what you put on your skin makes a big difference. And so Melanie has talked about this video, which is pretty good, explains it quite thoroughly. But I like this quote by John Mayer: "If you're pretty, you're pretty, but the only way to be beautiful is love it. Otherwise, it's just congratulations about your face." I think we're learning a lot right now in this time of isolation about what's really important. This has come out quite a bit, which is really cool. And I hope that you have an opportunity to to learn a lot during this time, because I know if you're a busy parent who's a student, it's harder than me, who's a empty nester. But there are advantages that are pretty clear, like, you know, you can save a lot of money if you don't buy the latest gizmos, and you don't maybe have as many clothes, or have a clothing exchange with your friends. Like, I know my daughter does that. She's in her 30s, and she gets together and they have a party. Of course, can't now, but will again, where they put all their clothes in the middle, and they tried on the clothes that people brought and went away with new clothes to them. And as you know, right now secondhand clothing stores are really popular. And if you have time once your student work is finished, you might have more time, then you might be able to learn to restructure a piece of clothing. Anyway, all these tips that we've given you are good ways to save money. And I was just going to show you a couple of examples I have in my kitchen, which is where I am. This is my home office. So I wanted to show you a couple of examples that I have in my kitchen of ways that you can save money. And it's pretty simple. All these tips that Melanie has already told you about, there's like clothing exchanges, but here, growing your own can save you money, but it can also give you good local food, right? If you don't use pesticides, and you build up your soil, and you learn this maybe when you're finished being like your year has ended for at UNB, you will have time to plant a garden. Who knows, in a little piece of soil somewhere in your life. Here's I keep my kale in the winter, and this is the end of the winter, and this is how long it's lasted. I've got this pickle jar that was free to me. A friend gave it to me that used to have pickles in it. Another thing is I make my own yogurt. So this is actually a coconut oil jar, but it was the right size, and I make this much per week, and our family uses this much. There's 3 adults in the house right now. Or using vinegar and water to clean. That's cheaper than a lot of the cleaning products that you can find in the store, and it's also healthier. So I just want to talk about where we live. Like, we have to, during this time when we're isolated, I think it's really important to, and any time, to count our blessings and to be grateful that we live where we live, because already we've lucked out in the context of the whole world. This is the biggest slum in the world. I think it's called Kibera, and it's in Kenya, in the middle of Nairobi, Kenya. And you think about these people and how hard it is to isolate from all the other people in these tiny houses. And we talk about green space here, and where's the green space there? It's not a very pleasant place to live, and COVID-19 would go through like wildfire. I think we're very lucky to live where we live. I think you've already won the lotto in that. Another thing that to do is to make the most of where we live, and to enjoy things that you love to do that make you feel good. Getting out in nature is a wonderful thing. We have nature all around us in New Brunswick. I don't know where you are from, but in many places in Canada, we have nature all around us, and we can get out in the woods here. We don't have to worry about being too crowded on the paths. So find what you love to do. It can be exciting, or it can be competitive. It can be just fun. And think of yourself as a little kid and how much you enjoyed getting out when you were little, but also take your kids out, because if you teach them now how wonderful it is to be outside and in nature, then they will grow up teaching their kids. I wanted to show you this slide because I think it's really important to realize that even though we live in Canada where we have cold temperatures and snow in the winter, other parts of the world have already figured out, even though they are way north of us and live and have shorter, even shorter days in the winter, they can show us, and we can learn from them about healthy living. So this one, it's the slide says 1,000 out of 1,200 kids in this school in Oulu, Finland, arrive by bicycle, even in winter. 100 to 150 walk. The rest come by ski, kick sleds, and finally a car. This day, when this picture was taken, it was minus 17 degrees. So I guess we can't complain about it being too cold or whatever. So it's something that we can learn from. So now I'm going to tell you about how I want you to help other people learn about how to reduce and to pass this information that you've received along to others. So first of all, you're going to make one written commitment to reduce your exposure to toxins. Just one simple commitment. It could be to wash your windows with vinegar and water. It could be to not ever use plastic in the microwave, which is one of the biggest key messages we want to give you. Whatever you decide that you can do at this time during COVID-19. And then I want you to think of 3 friends or family members whom you could enlighten. So they could be your mom and dad and aunt, or they could be your best friend who you haven't been able to see because you're stuck at home, or it could be your 10-year-old. And use the brochure that we have provided online to educate each person and get each person to make a commitment. You don't have to do it on the form because it's virtual, but I'll show you the brochure. Here's the brochure. It's on our site that we've given you the link to. So we've got a couple of sides of it. It gives you some examples, but we've got more examples online. It has a place where you can make a commitment on it, but it also has, you can print it off, but you can't really meet with people, so it's better just to do it virtually. And basically we want you to get people to actually write down their commitment and sign it and put it on the fridge. And you can contact them with and use the contact information on the tracking form, put the contact information on the tracking form just for you. It's just a way of keeping track. I'll show you the form in a minute. After a couple of weeks, contact your participants to find out how they are doing and record this in your experience on your tracking form, and then provide your instructor with any submission requirements as outlined in your syllabus, or as she has told or he has told you. Here's the homework tracking form. It's pretty simple, as you can see. To keep your privacy, we've kept it so that you can just give your student number, because your instructor can contact you through that, or you can put your email on and not send us the form. Or so as you see on the form, it says give your opinions on the usefulness of the project, how people reacted to it, and any helpful suggestions they have or you have. And so name, email, commitments that they made, whether they carried them out, and this is when you phone them a couple of weeks later, or Zoom them or FaceTime them, and any additional commitments that they want to make. We found that quite often people will make more than one commitment, and they'll find that it's so easy they want to do more, or maybe right now as families are together, they want to make more commitments as a family. Who knows? So it certainly isn't a good time to be making changes in your life. Our lives have completely changed. We don't have as many extracurricular activities. And I see families going for walks all over the place and bike rides, and this is great. So that's a healthy habit to do. Say a bike ride rather than a car, right? A car ride, right? Or they're doing spring cleaning because there's so much time they have, so they're doing spring cleaning as a family and giving jobs to each person and If you do it with less toxic cleaning substances, then this is a good thing to do because you're reducing everyone's exposure. So here on the site, we have lots of other commitments. If you're doing all the ones that we've mentioned so far, there's tons of commitments that you can make and ideas. I just wanted to show you this slide, which shows the difference that a policy change can make at the government level. This is in the States, and it shows the lead in gasoline actually impairs IQ, reduces IQ and the function of your brain, and it also correlates with violent criminality. They have shown this, that it made a difference when they reduced lead levels in gasoline and paint, which was a big route of exposure for a lot of people. So this happened in the 70s in Canada, that they stopped putting allowing lead in gasoline or in paint more recently. So it shows that the violent crime rate followed the curve of the reduced lead in gasoline. So in the USA, this shows the blood lead level, this black line, and then the red line showed the violent crime rate in this place called Nevin, and the difference it made after the lead came out of the gasoline and paint. So there you go, you see the crime rate went down. And they've also shown that things you put in your body can make a difference through your food, of course. And so if your food is contaminated with lead or arsenic, which has been shown in some cases with rice, or pesticides, or a lot of different things, it can make a difference to your overall health. But one really interesting experiment they did in a youth detention center in Britain was that they gave them much healthier food with more vegetables, less meat, and they found that their behavior changed radically. Like you've probably heard that children who are some kids who are exposed to red food dyes in the past would get agitated. I know of a little kid who used to go to swimming lessons with her school, the school my children went to, and as soon as she'd set foot in the pool, the chlorine in the air would drive her bananas, and she would get totally out of hand in her behavior. So I don't know if you've been exposed to this before, the different people who react to different things, but you probably know somebody who reacts to scents, with a migraine or something. And these are all indications that people react to the things in their environment. In Canada, we do different biomonitoring of people, and they've shown they can see the difference that policies make. So we say over 99% of Canadians have detectable levels of lead in their blood, this chart on the left. Smokers would have more than non-smokers because you're exposed to lead in cigarettes. Males also have higher amounts than females, and adults have more than little kids because they've been around longer and lead stays in your body. So they've shown since 1978-79, when they took lead out of gasoline and paint, they've shown in Canada 75% decrease in blood lead levels. And this was from the Canadian Health Measures Survey in 2012-2013. Bisphenol A, which has been mentioned before, is sometimes as being present on sales slips and cans. 92% of Canadians have detectable levels in their urine. Males higher than females, and obese people higher than less obese people. Children have higher levels than adults, probably because they crawl around and also their little bodies can excrete as well as adults. So this is a worrisome thing because it's a hormone disruptor. It's an endocrine disruptor, as Melanie's probably mentioned already. Another thing to consider is how much we spend on health. And this was from 2016, and or it was a projection 2016, and it was the National Health Expenditure Database from the Canadian Institute for Health Information. And 228 billion was what they projected. So we need to consider that when if we're interested in the wider good, the greater good, we have to consider that. And I think Canadians are interested in the greater good, and considering how we value our healthcare system, and if we wanted to keep it going well, we want to be able to have it working and not be too expensive. So as you increase people's overall health, you really reduce your health expenditures. I think they've already figured that one out for tobacco smoking. I want to tell you a little bit now about how Canada actually, on a broader scale, how Canada changes policy or works on policy. So to have healthy Canadians. So in 1994, or they came out with the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. We didn't have one before then. And in 1998, they modified it, but it hasn't been modified since. But in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, they in 2006 they categorized, I guess, up until 2006, they categorized 23,000 substances on that they thought would be ones that we should look at for safety and for risk. Melanie's already told you the difference between hazard or safety and risk. And in Canada, we look at risk. So we look at the greatest potential for human exposure, and then we see if, like, in other words, are we going to be exposed to it? And then we look at the whether it's persistent or bioaccumulative, because if it stays in our body and it builds up, that's not a good thing. We also look at whether it's toxic to humans or to other organisms. And so we look at, this tells us whether it's going to cause harm. And when they started doing this, well, roughly in the 90s and early 2000s, they came out with 4,300 priority existing substances that needed to be assessed. And this is the focus of the Chemicals Management Plan. The New Brunswick Lung Association wrote a proposal and won the request for proposals for to engage Canadians in this chemicals management plan, because they want to know what environmental health, people who care about environmental health think is important in terms of the chemical of the management of chemicals. Many people at the table, all the people at the table, were industries that actually made the chemicals, so they wanted to balance this out with the voice of people who wanted to put environmental health first. So we are an environmental health organization and a health charity, actually. So we actually got the contract in 2013 for this. And so the contract is to communicate knowledge and translate knowledge to and gather input from Canada's environmental health NGOs. So the part that the New Brunswick Lung Association plays in the chemicals management plan is that we engage Canadians Canadians that care about environmental health as their bottom line. We engage them in the plan, we help them make comments, we find experts, and this is really important, because the reason that Health Canada wanted somebody to do this was because at the table were all the industries that make and use the chemicals, and they wanted to have people who care about environmental health as their bottom line to be at the table. So this contract that we manage enables environmental health NGOs, CSOs to come to the table. So we find delegates to go to Ottawa, we get people to make comments. And as an example of something of the need to take care of your own mental health and personal well-being, this was me when I first started doing this contract. I was learning about all these awful flame retardants that we have in our couches and parabens in our makeup and triclosan that we use as a antibiotic, hand sanitizer, bisphenols in cans and on sales slips. Melanie's mentioned these are endocrine disruptors and all these things. I didn't want to be thinking about this for 5 days a week, so I decided, because it really made me feel sick, and I knew that it made people sick and our environment ill, I decided to just go to 3 days a week working on this. But the real positive, and I made sure that I do the stuff I love, like I was saying to you before, get out there and do the things that follow your passions. For me, it was getting out in nature and my family, I guess, at the time. And so that's really important. But I'm also very lucky because I have people all over Canada who are committed to helping with this project. So this is Glynis out in BC. She's an expert on flame retardants, and Juan Shu, who works on measuring biocontamination, and Deborah Courash from the University of Calgary, who does research on bisphenols, to Carol Chubb, to Don Spady, who's a retired pediatrician out in Alberta, and Carol Chubb, who's retired from Health Canada. And who's next? Is this one? Dorothy Wigmore from Winnipeg. And I think that Mohanad Malice works for Environmental Defense, a great organization that's working on your behalf. Faye De Leon in Toronto is working for the Canadian Environmental Law Association. She's a legal paralegal. Debjani Mukherjee, who's in a tiny apartment and is happily doing comments on different chemicals right now. She's a chemist, and she can't get out much, so she's working away for you guys. Meg Sears, who's a chemist as well, works for the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario doing research. I'm trying to think who this is. Jennifer Beeman, she's with Breast Cancer Action Montreal, and this Louise Wynn is a benzene expert from Queen's University. And you know this person, she's been on your screen for a while. And this is Melanie, who works for the New Brunswick Lung Association. Here's our CEO, Barb, who sits on the SAC, the Stakeholder Advisory Council for the CMP. And we have Joshua McNeely, who works for the Maritime Aboriginal Peoples Council and in Truro. And finally, in Nova Scotia, we have Sheila Cole, who works for the Nova Scotia Environmental Network. All these people around Canada work on our behalf to try and make things better and less toxic for Canadians. And so they're people just like you, and you can think about ways that in your career you could be a nurse or a chemist or a legal person, a lawyer, work for an NGO and do research, or just communicate with people to try and make a difference on a bigger policy level. And also, there's a lot more people than this. We have 470 odd people in our network across the country, but these are some of our key allies. All right, so after all that, thank you for listening to this presentation. You can email us at any time. We have sent you some resources, and your instructor has told you what's expected of you. If you have any questions, please do email us. We'll give our emails to your instructors. And I hope that the rest of your term goes really well. And we need you guys right now more than ever. Thanks.